Hello and welcome to my channel. Vice Rhino here. Today, I've got a treat for you. After I started writing the story of my time in an MLM, I decided that I wanted to go through an analysis of the organization I was with to see whether or not they would qualify as a type of cult. So I reached out to TellTale, who runs a YouTube channel that deals primarily with cults and oppressive religions, to help me go through the bite model and see whether or not I was involved in a cult. Trigger warning, being an interview, you see both myself and TellTale in the face. But don't worry, there are cats that sneak into the background occasionally to make up for it. Let's go! Alright, so I have with me TellTale, who has, he kind of specializes in cults on his channel. So, I've decided to call him up and he can help me go through the bite model to see if this MLM that I was a part of qualifies as a cult. Because that's one of the things they would emphasize quite regularly, is that like they'd get up on stage and say, "No, we are not a cult," and that's kind of a red flag for me. And so, welcome, TellTale.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so you want to give a brief background on the bite model?
Sure. The bite model was written by Stephen Hassan many years ago. It's been around for a very long time. And there have been different versions throughout time. He wrote it out originally when he was studying human trafficking and general religious cults. Then he got into political cults and psychology cults and things like that. So he wrote this model in an attempt to figure out exactly what it is that makes a cult. So we have 4 sections on the bite model. Each section has around 10 points in it, give or take. And the 4 sections are behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. It's the 4 ways in which cults control their members. This is the definition of cult for all intents and purposes. So I figured we would go through some of the points and talk about how your old group, the old group that you were a part of, applies to the bite model, or how the bite model applies to your group. So let's take a look at behavior control first. We can't hit all of the points, but I wanted to hit the relevant points if possible. So the first point I wanted to take a look at was they promote dependence and obedience. Does your old... well, actually, first of all, can you tell me a little bit about your group? What was it called exactly, and what did they do and believe?
Well, currently they are called Life Leadership, and it's basically they promote themselves as like a self-help organization. They've got what they call the, I think it's 8 Fs now. It was only 5 Fs when I was there. It was like faith, family, fitness, finance, fun, and some other things that start with F that they supposedly help you improve in your life. And yeah, so they sell CDs and books and seminars and stuff like that that are supposed to help you in these areas of your life. Now, it all is basically, you know, your typical vague self-help style stuff. So there's nothing really special in the product itself. But they, you know, they use their marketing as a, like, you make money by selling other people this stuff.
Right, that makes sense. So, with that context in mind, under behavior control, did they promote dependence and obedience?
Yeah, kind of. It's one of those things where, like, they wanted you to be basically inundated in their materials at all times. They would discourage you from, you know, listening to music. You should be listening to CDs instead. Yeah, this kind of ties into a lot of the other points in the bite model as well, but like they like you need to be around the people that are in the group. You need to always be at the seminars, and you need to go to their major conventions every 3 months. And you know, even when you're not going to seminars, you should still be going to. They had weekly meetings that were more local than the seminars. And they push the idea that you should spend as much time as possible with other people that are involved, so that you can learn to be like the people that are more successful in it, and so their success will rub off on you.
Right, that makes sense. So what about modifying behavior with rewards and punishments? This is a cornerstone of forming out the cult identity in somebody and replacing their authentic identity with it. Did you see any of this?
Now, this kind of, yeah. So that's they would do things like they would want you to, like I said, inundate yourself in their system. And there would be some rewards, like they would have contests where is to see who could listen to more CDs than everybody else in a given period, and you'd be rewarded for that. There are different rewards for there's a program that they did is called the Power Player program, where if you go out and you present the business plan to so many people in a month and sign up so many people in this certain configuration, they call you a Power Player. At which point they like parade you across the stage, everybody applauds at you, and if you there are other, like if you hit Power Player every month, then you can qualify for other rewards that they have. I'm not sure if that quite qualifies as modifying behavior, because it's, I don't know, it's like giving a sales pitch a certain amount of times rather than how you behave as a person. What do you think?
I would say that does sound like a system of rewards and punishments. It can be a very simple, basic form of rewards and punishment system. So some more mild cults eventually have enthusiastic, zealous followers. It just takes a little bit longer for them to get to that point. So with Scientology, their members become radicalized very, very rapidly. With Jehovah's Witnesses, it takes a little bit more time to become radicalized because their touch is lighter, basically. So I wouldn't be opposed to saying that this group does have a system of rewards and punishments to basically program in a cult personality. It may just be a lighter touch than Scientology, for example.
Yeah, and really the punishments aren't so much punishments as the rewards aren't there anymore unless you continue the behavior.
Right, that makes sense. So what about clothing and hairstyle? Did they try to control anything like that?
Yes. Now, it wasn't ever presented as a you are not allowed to dress this way, but it was presented as a, well, all of the successful people, all the successful businessmen wear dark suit with a white shirt and a red tie. And you keep your hair cut close, clean shaven. Like it was kind of like, it wasn't like a dress code. You wouldn't be kicked out for not dressing that way, but you would be looked down upon by the other members. And it was like they often did talk about how like they would bring up like, oh, well, you see the president of the United States is always wearing a dark suit with a red or blue tie and a white shirt, and they're always clean cut. Well, recently they're always clean cut. That wasn't quite the same 100 years ago. They encourage a certain aesthetic.
That's exactly what Jehovah's Witnesses do. They do the exact same thing. Although in some cases, depending on what it is you're doing, you can be reproved in Jehovah's Witnesses, which basically means you are punished by not being allowed to do certain things in the congregation, like, carry the microphones or give talks or whatever. But they do the exact same thing. They say you're not allowed to wear beards because it reflects badly on the religion. It doesn't look good or clean or whatever. Completely different reasons for not wearing beards in reality, but they do the exact same thing. So I can definitely get on board with that. What about depriving you of sleep? Do they do any of that?
So yes, but not regularly. So that's something where when you go to their major conventions, which happen once every 3 months, it's a weekend convention. You'd get there on Friday at like 5:00 is when they would start the first one. It would go all the way until midnight, and then the culture was such that it'd be like we want to see enthusiastic people. It's the most enthusiastic people that are the most successful. So how do you show your enthusiasm at these things? Well, everybody's enthusiastic. You show your enthusiasm by being up before everybody else. So you'd be like lined up to get the good seats in the convention hall at like 6 a.m. sometimes. And then, like the morning convention didn't start until like 9 o'clock. And then it would go until like midnight again. And then after that one, there would often be like get-togethers afterward. And they regularly there'd be people telling stories about just how much sleep they lost at these conventions. But it's like a badge of honor. I lost this much sleep. That means I'm so enthusiastic and into it. And they would brag about like the excitement of the event being what keeps you awake and lets you drive home safely. There's actually a bit of physical danger involved with this, because like they would encourage people to do whatever it takes to get there, including like driving through the night in ridiculous weather. We actually lost 2 vehicles to accidents while we were involved in this thing, driving to and from these conventions. Because it's a badge of honor. I drove through a nasty snowstorm, and now I totaled my van while I was driving through the nasty snowstorm. Now I've got a better story because that's the adversity that I faced down. But yeah, there's definitely at those conventions there was encouragement to not sleep.
I'm telling you, man, I'm listening to some of this stuff, and it sounds so familiar to like the stories of cult members that I've heard, like full-blown, Heaven's Gate members and stuff, like some of the things that I've heard from people like that. It's really, really crazy. So what about, let me find the next one. Hang on. What about, what about exploiting you financially? Is there any of that? How does that play into the group?
I would say as an MLM, that's kind of their whole thing. Because if you just look at the numbers that they release themselves to the public, like something like 99.9% of the members make a pittance. Like they barely make anything. They encourage you to, like, you have to spend at least $50 a month in order to even qualify to receive a paycheck back from them. And they would encourage you to up that to at least $200 a month, because they had they had a different system for all the different Fs, and each one was like $50 a month. And they would want you to do all 8 of them. Or
so
all
it was
5
like
of them,
a monthly thing where
you would
pay
get
every month to...
Yeah, it was like a subscription. You subscribe to their CDs, and they send you talks on these certain topics depending on which of the Fs you signed up for. And they would, like, if you just did one, it was $50, but they encourage you to do all 5 or 8 or whatever it is.
Fascinating. What about the time investment? Like, what kind of time investment was there? I'm sorry, hang on. Next on the bite model is restricting leisure time and activities. Like, what kind of time investment did you deal with this group?
So the thing is, they advertise themselves as being like, this is a way to make money without having to work anymore. So they advertise themselves as being, this frees up more of your time so you can do what you want to do instead of going to work. Now, of course, you can't just quit your job and join an MLM, because you don't make any money when you first join an MLM. So they would encourage you to, like I said, you go power player. That means you have to show the plan. They call it 15 times a month. So, and it takes at least an hour to an hour and a half to do that. So it's 15 hours right there. That this is on top of whatever job you may have. Then they've got the seminars and the major conventions, and like, yeah, if you add it all up, it doesn't really amount to much. But then they also try they want you to not hang out with people that aren't part of the business anymore. So even if you might not be actively doing something in the business, you're discouraged from doing something like, say, joining a local sports group. It's like, well, why don't you get successful in the business and start your own sports group with people that think the same as you? Yeah. So it wasn't...
That makes sense.
It wasn't a huge time investment in active time, but they definitely didn't want you to have they didn't want you to have free time unless it was free time with other people that are part of the business.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, kind of go into the whole thing assuming that you have a full-time, like 40-hour-a-week job. So they fill up your time schedule outside of that. So you don't really have any time to invest into alternative activities. This is your hobby, this is your life, and this is what you're going to do when you're not at work, basically. That's kind of the idea behind it. So they had meetings. I think they had 3 meetings per week, 2 of which were 2 hours long. One was 1 hour long. And you had, when I was in it, it's changed a little bit now. And you had to study books and underline and answer questions in preparation for it and things like that, which doesn't seem like a huge time sink in itself, but the more invested you become in it, the more time it takes up, basically. So it sounds kind of similar to what you're describing here.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't we take a look at the next section, which is information control? The first point under information control is, do they forbid you... I'm sorry, hang on. The first point I wanted to take a look at under information control is forbid you from speaking with ex-members and critics. Was there any of that in the group?
It's not explicitly forbidden, but they do encourage you to spend as much time as possible among people in their in-group. The idea being that the more time you spend with successful people, the more successful you yourself will become. So yeah, you can still go hang out with your... so you remember, before we started recording, I talked to you a bit about Robert Kiyosaki's book and the 5% and the 95% thing. So they would call people that aren't successful, they would call them 95%ers. And people that are, they call them 5%ers. So it's like, you want to hang out with the 5%ers, not the 95%ers. So they don't forbid you from speaking with them, but it is strongly discouraged for you to spend any significant amount of time with people that is like you. They would tell you constantly that like you become who you hang out with the most often. So you want to make sure you hang out with the 5%ers, not the 95%ers.
I just want to make note here, that's usually how cults do it. They don't outright forbid you from doing this thing or that thing, or from talking to these people or that people. They want to make it a cultural thing rather than a doctrinal thing, if possible. Because if they make it doctrine, if they make all of these rules like doctrine that you can be, excommunicated for, you are less likely. It's going to be harder to bring people into the group than if these were more cultural norms. And the reason for that is, if you look at Scientology, for example, they have around 50,000 members. We don't really have exact numbers, but that's the rough estimate. If you look at Jehovah's Witnesses, it's 8.5 million members. The reason that Scientology is smaller than Jehovah's Witnesses is largely because the investment, the social investment and cost to being a member is higher for Scientology than for Jehovah's Witnesses up front. If you do it more gradually and if you make it more of a cultural thing, it's easier to get people to kind of join and then spring these surprises on them as time goes on, like a year, 2 years in. Oh, now you're baptized 2 years after studying, and that means you can't talk to critics, period. But with Scientology, you can't do that from the very beginning. That's the idea behind it. So the more extreme a group is, the fewer members it's able to bring in. But anyways, yeah, I'll just leave that there. Let's take a look at the next point on the BITE model. This one is discourage access to non-cult sources of information. Do they do this at all?
Yes. Google is their enemy, and they don't even try to hide that. I remember when they first started, I was in with them when they first started setting up their websites and blogs. And they actually, I doubt it ever made it onto a recording, but they said at the seminars that like, this is specifically to take advantage of search engine optimization, where they will all have blogs and they'll all be linking to each other. So if you search for Orrin Woodward, you're going to find 15 blogs of people that are his close personal friends before you find the one website of the guy who's got a personal vendetta against him for some reason and is doing his best to try and take him down. Like they would tell you that, like, oh, you could go to any bookstore and find the self-help books that we sell here, but the thing is, like, you want the self-help books that have been vetted by these people that you already know are successful, because you don't know who's writing the books. So you want the successful people to vet them first. So you get your books from us, not from the bookstore, and that sort of thing.
That makes sense. That's kind of a hallmark of the information control section, is the idea that they want to build a narrative that frames the group positively and try to shut out any counter narratives or criticisms of any kind. This is what the group wants you to know. And anytime a situation or any kind of circumstance appears, they want you to find out what the group's ideas about this would be, or find out what the founder had to say about this kind of thing. Civil unrest, are there, civil rights issues happening in society? How does the group feel about this? That kind of thing. That's what Jehovah's Witnesses do, and Scientologists do, and basically every other cult out there. They build this narrative, and they want you to fit it. They want you to fit the information that you get outside of the group into what the group's narrative says, or just get your information from the narrative itself if possible. So that makes sense. What about extensive use of propaganda? Do they do this in any way?
I would say so. Now it depends on how you're defining propaganda, but you are supposed to be going to these seminars and listening to the CDs and not listening to like music or like just the radio stations with the talk radio DJs or whatever. You want to get your information from them specifically, and the information is all we can definitely put this in propaganda. I just remembered when I was researching for the first part of this video, I stumbled across a video from one of the founders of this, one of the late founders of this company, because they have this thing where they kind of retcon their stories in to make it sound like they were what they are now forever in the past. And so this guy, his name is George Gazzardo. He's telling the story about how one specific product from this company, the Financial Matrix pack or something like that, how it completely changed his life and it gave him the financial information that he needed to survive the 2008 housing market crash, when he had millions invested in properties that just disappeared overnight, but he was able to survive that thanks to this financial information pack. Thing is, the financial information pack that he was referencing didn't exist until at least 2010. So he's referencing this thing that doesn't even exist that saved it. But now part of that, like what I attributed that to when I was just first looking at it, was like the information they're giving you is just so vague and generic that it doesn't matter what they were calling it. It's the same thing. But yeah, it could be considered propaganda as well.
I would say, as I said before, it's almost like the cult builds this narrative and then they release memes or release promotional information or whatever else that's designed to support this narrative. From what I've heard, it sounds like there is a lot of propaganda used. And not only that, but the point on the Byte model actually is generate and use propaganda extensively. I would say
that's their whole business model.
Their use, yeah, that's the whole business model, right? Their use of the CDs and everything else, it's all about propaganda that they've generated. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. That's the end of information control. Why don't we take a look at thought control? The first point I wanted to take a look at under there is instill black versus white, us versus them, and good versus evil thinking. Do they do any of that?
Absolutely. That's the 95%er versus the 5%er. Like, do you want to be a 5%er? If you want to be a 5%er, you got to stop hanging out with the 95%ers. don't think like them. Think like the 5%ers.
Yeah, that makes sense. You do find a lot of that within cults. There's almost like a superiority kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
A superiority complex. They believe that they're better than everybody else, and they have information that nobody else has access to, and they're helping the world by providing this information to them, by knocking on their door and giving them watchtowers or giving them these promotional CDs or whatever else. So what about changing your identity, possibly even your name? Do they do any of that?
They don't change your name. As far as changing your identity goes, they're right out there saying that they want to change how you think and how you approach your life, and their whole thing is like they run under the guise of being about personal development. So that's kind of their whole product is change yourself for what they see as the better.
That's interesting. Jehovah's Witnesses call it the new personality or the Christian personality, quote unquote. The whole idea behind this is to basically program in a cult personality, program in a new personality that replaces their authentic personality. That's why when you deal with cults, a lot of the members just look like clones of each other. And you may think, well, self-help is fine. What's wrong with self-help? What's wrong with changing who you are? Any honest group or any honest girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever wouldn't ask you to change your identity for them. That's not okay. You are who you are. Now, there is such a thing as personal improvement and things like that. That's okay. But no group should be dictating to you what is best for you to do or what personality traits are best for you to adopt, right?
Right.
You should look to psychology for that kind of information, not Life Leadership or Young Living or any other group, Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay. With that being said, let's take a look at the next one. What about loaded language and cliches? Do they use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought?
Yeah, they have like their own lingo that like if somebody says something that makes you think bad things about the business, you just dismiss it as like, oh, that's just 95% thinking.
An easy dismissal to make.
Yeah.
What about thought-stopping techniques? Do they use thought-stopping techniques or thought-terminating cliches to prevent critical thoughts?
Yeah, there's a lot of like mottos and slogans and things that sound good on their surface that get thrown around all the time. You get to the conventions, you're supposed to be excited. People are yelling fired up all the time. And, but yeah, I'm not sure if that's like actually something that they teach for the purpose of stopping thought, but I don't know, it kind of falls into the same, like, dismiss things as like, oh, that's from 95%ers, so you can just dismiss that.
Right. What about allowing only positive thoughts? Do you see any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. They put a huge emphasis on thinking positively. The Magic of Thinking Big is one of their, what they call the top 5 books. Like they stop short of doing that thing where like you send positive vibes out into the universe and then positive things will come back to you. They don't quite get there, but they do tie in like how positive you are will have a direct impact on how successful you are in the long run.
That's kind of like the law of attraction type of thing, right?
It's very similar.
Subscribe to it or?
No, I don't think they don't quite get into the wooey aspect of it. They try and tie it all in with like if you personally develop yourself, then like that being positive is a part of that, and then you will be successful.
Right. What about rejection of rational analysis, critical thinking, and doubt? Do they do any of that or?
Yeah, I actually remember at one point it became legally required for us when we show the plan to also present what's called an income disclosure statement, which shows this percentage of people are at this level and this is how much they make on average. And they tweak the levels to make it look as good as they possibly could, but they also had to include all the little fine prints. And I remember one time one of the guys we showed the plan to brought it back to us with all the fine print like highlighted, being like, okay, well, it says half of new members disappear within their first year. 90 some odd percent are not even making any money. They're like, they signed up as members, but they're now officially customers. So they put them in a different category to try and make the bigger numbers that are easier to see look better. And again, just to bring it back to the 95% thinking, this was how we dismissed it. Oh, he's thinking 95%. Like, oh, yeah, of course, some people sign up and they just want to be customers because our product is so good. And, you know, so the 50% of people that leave, that's just, they didn't want to improve themselves. There's not a problem with the business. It's a problem with them. And,
right. Fascinating. That's extremely interesting. So it was like a legal obligation at one point where, I guess you were court ordered, or the business was court ordered.
No, there was, I think there was an FTC ruling that came down about a different MLM that, like, I don't think it was actually a legal requirement. This was them kind of spinning it. Like, it was a cover your ass sort of situation where it's like, if we present the income disclosure statement, then we're protected from this type of lawsuit. So I'm not legally required to show it to you, but if we do that, then they can't sue.
All right, that makes sense. Fascinating, man. That was the end of thought control. Why don't we take a look at emotional control, the final category on the BITE model? Do they instill irrational fears or phobias of questioning or leaving the group? Did you see any of that?
Yeah, because anytime anyone talks about leaving, it's always a matter of like, well, this is like whatever reason you can possibly come up with for leaving, that's just you making excuses, because anyone can do this business if they're willing to put in the work. So you don't want to put in the work, therefore there's something wrong with you. That's why you are quitting.
What about love bombing? Did you see any love bombing taking place?
Yes, at all of the events, there are always recognition sessions where when you have certain accomplishments or you hit a certain level, and oftentimes it was just small things like you would get walked across the stage and applauded if you just showed the plan 15 times that month. If you went to all of the Tuesday night meetings, you'd get to stand up and people would applaud you. And like anytime you walked across the stage, everybody in your upline would be right there to, you know, give you hugs and congratulate you on a job well done. And they designed it so that as many people as possible would get recognition. And the whole time they're doing it, they'd be playing like sappy, inspirational music. And I actually worked on the AV desk for these seminars for a while, so I selected some of the sappy music to get the biggest emotional punch out of it.
Cringy. Fascinating, though. It's extremely fascinating that they... I
think we might have violated copyright laws, too. I'm not sure, but the fact that they didn't train us... They didn't train us how to not violate them, so...
Right. A lot of cults tend to not really care about that stuff. That makes sense, though. What about shunning you if you disobey or disbelieve? Does that happen at all?
I haven't heard from anyone that's still in the business since we left. So I'm going to go with yes. This is one of those things. It's not like their official policy. You have to shun them. It's, again, you want to spend your time around 5%ers. If this person quit, they're obviously a 95%er. Are they worth keeping in your life?
Yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't necessarily need to be a doctrinal, you're going to get kicked out if you do this thing or that thing type of situation. It can be a cultural thing. And in an ideal world for cults, they prefer it if it's a cultural thing rather than a doctrinal thing. If they can just get the members to do it and control themselves rather than having to order this thing or that thing, it makes it a lot more likely that they'll be able to bring people in without them really knowing that this is a situation that occurs until they're the ones doing it.
Well, there's also a neat little double lane sort of thing of information going out where you have the official information coming from the people on stage or whatever, but then they would tell their direct downline something specific, and then that would, like, it would make its way down the pipeline. So you'd have the official, if anyone's going to sue us, this is what they're going to look at, sort of thing, and then the word of mouth that if that gets down to someone there and they do something and it ends up in legal trouble, they can't sue us because that's not the official stance of the company, right? Same thing with like the same way they did medical claims when they were part of Monavie. Like you'd get up on the stage, there would be personal testimonies on the stage or whatever, but they always had the the legal thing. It was like, oh well, we're not actually claiming that it cures these things, but this is this person's personal story. But then when talking in person with other people in the business, they would absolutely frame it as like, oh, this is healing this and curing that.
Yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses do the exact same thing. Scientologists do the exact same thing. It's an extremely common pattern you find in cults. So let's look at the very last point on the bite model that I wanted to cover. Do they teach that there is no happiness or peace outside the group?
I wouldn't so much say no happiness or peace, but it's certainly much more difficult and much more rare to obtain happiness and peace if you're not a part of their group. Is if you join the MLM, that's the easiest way to achieve all your life's goals. I don't know why anyone would want a lifestyle different than the one that we have here at the top of this MLM. So it's like they would say there's you could do like real estate will get you a pipeline income, but then you can run into like there's so many legal problems you can run into with real estate, whereas this is just like you can do the work once and sit back and relax for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense. Interesting. Well, that's the end of the bite model. My final conclusion with this is that it is a cult. I feel like we talked about what makes something a cult and what doesn't, and based on the information that you provided about the group, I feel really comfortable saying that this is definitely a cult, and people should be extremely wary about dealing with the group. What do you think about it?
Well, I think I was actually surprised when I was going through the bite model. I found myself in my head kind of excusing what they were doing. Like, oh, no, well, it's not really that. So like as I was reading through it myself, I was just like, yeah, maybe it doesn't hit enough of the points to really be a cult. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not a cult. And like even to this day, I have a hard time thinking of the people that are at the top of this thing as being malicious. Like it seems easiest to me. Like they seem like such nice, caring people and honest, good people that they must just not have realized that MLMs just in general are not mathematically sustainable. But like that doesn't jive with the fact that the two guys that founded it, the two main guys, Chris Brady and Orrin Woodward, they're former engineers. If they couldn't figure out the math on an MLM not working out, then there's a reason they're not engineers anymore. Even years later, when I know for a fact that this thing doesn't work, I still have a hard time thinking bad things about these people. It's this whole deprogramming process.
Yeah, that makes sense. Bear in mind, a lot of the Jehovah's Witnesses that I grew up with were really genuinely good people too. Like, to the bottom of their heart, they had no malicious intent in their heart. Not being malicious isn't a qualifier for being a cult or a cult leader, cult member. They can be perfectly good people and really believe in what they're doing, and it can still be using control tactics on people, even unintentionally, that are destructively influencing people. That's the qualifier to make it a cult. And as far as I'm concerned, this group met the qualifications.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. That was very enlightening.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It was very interesting.
So if anyone wants to check out TellTale's channel, he will be linked in the description. I see you've got a little Christmas tree in your background there. You want to maybe pimp some of your 3D printed ornaments?
Yeah, well, you can do that. I also, not only do I have like ornaments and tree toppers and stuff, I also have just like game controller stands and cartridge stands and stuff that I sell on my Etsy store I don't know. It's kind of a side thing, not really related to YouTube, but I just really love retro games and stuff. So that's what I do in my spare time is run a little
in
Etsy
your
store.
spare time, you run your 14 3D printers.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, it's not
so
really spare time. It's actually business time. So
I'm not sure. Yeah, I've seen the pictures of all your empty filament boxes. I'm not sure if this is going to air before Christmas, but if it does come out after Christmas, Telltale still does have lots of stuff in his Etsy store, so go check that out. I'll have it linked down below as well. So thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.